Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This evening we're going to explore yet another angle in the topic of love from Rabbi Zalman, from the Alter Rebbe in Tanya chapters 48 and 49. In this, love quashes the flesh. The biggest obstacle to love, yourself. In this chapter, Rabbi Zalman has an extremely original and powerful analysis of a Talmudic story that I don't know if anyone had read it this way until the Hasidic spin was put on it. It's a rather strange story which we're going to look at. We'll have a look at how it was understood on a more simple level, and then the way Rabbi Zalman brings it out. As he says, Rabbi Zalman called this book, he didn't call it Tanya, he called it Likutei Amarim, which means a gathering, a collection of sayings. And in his humility, he was saying that his work is just a collection of sayings from previous sages, from previous scholars, from the holy men and from the past. He wasn't taking credit for it. And indeed, in everything he says, he always brings sources from Talmudic or Kabbalistic tradition. Much of what he says is quoted from the previous generations. However, the angle, the spin that he puts on it is so original, so unique, that nobody really saw it that way until then. And so it's far more than just a gathering of sayings. It's a new angle, a new way of looking at Judaism, at mysticism, and at these very powerful ideas that he shares. And so we're going to look at this Talmudic passage first, which is not quoted in full in Tanya. In fact, it's only mentioned very briefly in Tanya. But we're going to look at it in full, and then we're going to see how Tanya slips it in to explain a very powerful idea in connection with love. This is the tale straight out of the Talmud. The Talmud says, when Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Elazar, two great sages, met, one could pass through with a yoke of oxen under them and not touch them. Which is a rather strange statement, that Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar, that when they met, you could pass through them with a yoke of oxen and not touch them. What is this talking about? What is this saying? Now, it should be noted before we actually explain what it says, that the Talmud is known for outlandish, out there, very unusual statements. There are all types of stories of things brought up in the Talmud that you just would not expect to hear. It's there to shock you. It's supposed to wake you up. It's supposed to grab your attention. And this is one example. What this is talking about is Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Elazar were both known to be rather obese. To the point where they would meet each other and they would stand there talking. They'd be so far away from each other that a yoke of oxen, a few oxen could pass between them. That's how far away they were from each other when they would speak. This is what the Talmud says. Why this is necessary information, why we need to hear this, we'll have to see. Because it seems like a rather strange thing to say. A slightly sort of comical, vision of two rabbis talking to each other, both rather large and far away from each other, I guess, in some ways. But why we need to hear this, it seems really strange. It's noteworthy that very seldom do we hear any details of the appearance, of the physical appearance of the rabbis. Similar to in the Torah itself, the Torah tells us very little details about how people look. And the Talmud as well very rarely will give us any details about the looks of the great sages. And yet here there's a quite direct discussion about the size of the bellies of these two rabbis. So it is very out of character, and therefore it should grab our attention that something is up here. Something is interesting here. If that weren't enough, the next continuation of this Talmudic statement is even more bizarre. Said a certain Roman matron to them, "Your children are not yours." They replied, "Our wives are even bigger than us." "Well, that proved my allegation all the more," she observed. What's going on here? So this Roman matron who sees these rabbis says, your children are not yours. Meaning, it's impossible. It's mission impossible. It couldn't be that your children are yours. Your wife has become impregnated by somebody else, and maybe that she claims that they're your children, but it's not possible with your size to actually be able to impregnate your wife. It's physically mission impossible. This is what this Roman matron says to these two rabbis as they were standing there talking to each other. So they replied, well, our wives are even bigger than us. So she says, well, then for sure, that just proves my point even more. That there's no way that they're your children. Okay. So a rather strange exchange, and it doesn't end there. After she's saying, well, this proves my allegation even more, they answered her, love quashes the flesh. In Hebrew, ava docheket et basar, that love quashes, squashes, pushes the flesh. Meaning that when two people love each other, even if there's a lot of flesh in between, but the love overcomes the flesh. And so they're able to be intimate, to be together, to be close, and therefore our children are our own. Say Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Elazar. And that's the story. Now, again, we're reading here the Talmud. The Talmud is not a book of entertainment primarily, even though there are some very entertaining stories in the Talmud, but it's not there just to entertain you or to just tell you something strange or weird or cute or unusual. It is there to teach, to somehow impart wisdom. There's supposed to be something that we're supposed to learn from this. And this story seems so strange, so almost lewd and inappropriate. And even if not, what does it fit? What are we supposed to gain from this exchange between this Roman matron and these rabbis, talking about how large they are, how fat they are, and the challenge that would pose to their relationship with their wife? And to hear all the details back and forth that they say back, well, our wives are even bigger than us. Which is, it's a cute vision to imagine, but why would they say that? And then when she counted, well, that proves me even further. So they say, well, no, that love quashes the flesh. It's a bit disturbing at first to read this story in the Talmud and try and make a head or tail of it. It's a little bit unusual, to say the least. In fact, this passage of Talmud is sometimes quoted by critics of Talmud, both Jewish and not, from within and without, to say how ridiculous the Talmud is, like how foolish it is. People have this claim that Talmud is supposed to be, the wisdom of the Jewish people. Look what it's full of. Stories like this, like just emptiness, bizarre statements, and ridiculous things. I once saw this Talmud, this passage translated in a joke book, trying to make fun of the Talmud. And you can see why. It's a very strange exchange to be contained in the Talmud, to be spoke about in the Talmud. And so those who have not studied Talmud, if this was your exposure to it, if this is what the little taste of the Talmud was this little passage here, you'd say, so what's the brilliance exactly of the Talmud? It's been claimed that the Talmud is what gives the sharpness of the Jewish mind. That over so many centuries, having learnt the Talmud, because it is such a sharp and mind expanding type of book, so it has impacted the psyche of the Jewish people that this is why we have this sharp mind that is often associated with being Jewish. But reading this type of Talmud, this type of statement, you sort of think, well, this is what brings wisdom and sharpness. Doesn't seem to at all. In fact, it's known that those who study Talmud study it for hours, will spend an entire day analyzing a passage of Talmud. But imagining people reading this and talking about this all day just seems strange, comical. But of course, it's supposed to. It's supposed to seem strange. It's supposed to seem weird. It's supposed to grab your attention. This is the style of the Talmudic rabbis, that they will throw something out like this that is supposed to just knock you and say, what on earth? Where do you start? What is this about? What can this possibly mean? And so we're being beckoned to go deeper, to try and scratch the surface and find what is actually going on here. Why is this recorded in the Talmud? Even if it happened, why do we need to know about this? 1,000 or 2,000 years later, this discussion between these rabbis and this Roman matron. And each part of it we have to look at. The fact that these two rabbis are so large, they're described as so large that these oxen can pass through them. And this matron's statement, your children are not yours, and they reply, our wives even bigger. Well, that proves us. And then she says, they answer her, well, love quashes the flesh. What is going on here? So we'll look at a couple of perspectives before we go into Rabbi Shneur Zalman's idea in this. First one is from the Tosfos. Tosfos is a medieval French commentary on the Talmud. Rashi is a very famous commentary. His sons-in-law, grandchildren, and students were known collectively as the Tosfos. They made a running commentary on the Talmud, and they asked this question. The Tosfos say, why does the Talmud record this episode? What's it here for? And the answer of the Tosfos is in order to allay any suspicion about the pedigree of children from similar parents. In fact, in other words, the Tosfos says there is a legal basis for this story. It's to create a precedent. If anybody ever comes to question the parentage of a person who both their parents seem rather large, and so how is it possible that they are actually the real parents? So the Talmud lays down that no, we have a precedent for this. We have two couples here who were known to be very large, and they testified about themselves that they were able to procreate because love quashes the flesh, and so therefore it is possible. A topic that otherwise perhaps would not have been brought up in common discussion, it wouldn't have been spoken about. The Talmud records it, so we should know for all generations that any time you're not sure about somebody's parentage because of this particular circumstance, you should know that no, it's okay. They are the real parents. And this does have halachic ramifications, who a person's parents are, as far as their Jewishness or their tribal affiliation or inheritance, or who they can and can't marry. You need to know what family they came from. So it has relevance. There's a legal relevance for it, and that's why the Talmud records this story. So the Tosfos says it's a technical thing. It's something it has a legal purpose, and that's what it's here for. Which, okay, that can be taken at face value. It's fair enough. The Talmud does sometimes give us stories, sometimes rather out there stories, in order to illustrate a certain law. So we now know the law that you can have parents who are both very large, and that's okay. Fine. That is one angle. However, we can't leave it there. There must be more to it. And I want to share with you another angle. This one is from the Maharal. The Maharal was Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, the rabbi of Prague in the 16th century. He's famous for having created the golem, a humanoid figure that Frankenstein is based on his story, that there's a Kabbalistic idea that you can, out of mud, create through mystical incantations a humanoid being, that he did by using divine names to enliven this figure made out of the mud. And this golem figure patrolled the Jewish quarter of Prague and protected the Jews for a certain amount of time. There are a lot of fascinating stories about it. That's what the Maharal is most famous for. However, really, the Maharal's greatest contribution to the world was not his golem that he created, but his writings. That he's a prolific writer on areas of Jewish mysticism and philosophy, and he particularly liked to take the most difficult passages of the Talmud and to unravel them, to explain them, to make them make a bit more sense. And he has one work called Ber Hagola, which is dedicated specifically to the most outlandish statements in the Talmud, to try and give a bit of deeper explanation to them. And he used a lot of Kabbalistic and mystical ideas and showed how the rabbis of the Talmud were teaching those ideas in roundabout ways through their sometimes unusual stories. And this is one example. So he says, the Maharal writes that the Tosfos, who we just saw, wrote their explanation for those who are not privy to deeper wisdom. For in truth, these words of the Talmud contain secrets of wisdom. In other words, the Tosfos said that the reason why this story is here is to tell us that if you have such a case, don't question the parents. They are the real parents. It's a legal thing. He says the Tosfos wrote that, not because it's not true, but they made it like, that's it, that's all it is. Because not everyone is privy to the deeper wisdom. Not everyone can enter into the depth of everything, and so there has to be a simple explanation for everything as well. The simple explanation for this story is it's a legal precedent and that's it. But that's not the end of the story. There's much more to it, which the Maharal is now going to introduce to us. And he says, the union of man and woman to become one being, which is what this story discussed. This union should not be seen as a physical act, as it is with other creatures, other animals. It is not so. For the power of man and woman to unite is directly from God, as is hinted at in the Hebrew words for man and woman. Meaning that the union of male and female should not be seen as a purely physical act. It's not something that is reduced to a physical urge, but it is something that is way beyond that, much higher than that, much more powerful than that. And this story that is describing these rabbis and their wives is trying to illustrate the inner power of human sexuality and in the intimate relations between man and woman. And it's saying, as we'll see, that it's not merely a physical act, it's a far deeper thing than that. And how is that? Why are we different? When an animal procreates, it is a physical act of simple procreation, continuing the species, and nothing more than that. When humans are intimate together, so it is a union that is directly an expression of God. It's a divine event. It's a holy event. This is hinted at in the Hebrew words for man and woman. Because in Hebrew, the word for man is ish, the word for woman is isha. And if you look at those two words, ish and isha, they share two letters, aleph and shin, but they each have another third letter, different one. Ish has a yud and isha has a hey. And so these two letters, yud and hey, are a name of God. So aleph and shin, the shared letters, make aish, which is fire. Yud and hey is a name of God. And so the idea that when male and female unite, you have a divine power, you have the name of God. A man on his own, a woman on her own, does not have the divine name. The man has a yud, the woman has a hey, but that's not a name until you put them together. When there's a unification of man and woman in the fire of love, in the fire of passion and love, so then you have the divine name yud and hey, you have a divine name created. When do man and woman come together? On a physical plane, that is during the sexual union. That is when they're united. And at that moment, they are in a divine state. It is at that moment that life can be created, just like God creates life, so too man and woman together can create life. It's at that moment that they're in the divine image, the image of God. When it says about Adam and Eve, that Adam and Eve were created in the image of God, it was when they were together as one. Not individually, but when male and female are together, they're in the divine image, the image of God. And that is denoted by the fact that in the very names in the Hebrew language, ish and isha, man and woman, there is a divine name that is only created when you combine the two, when they're united as one. And this idea of the Maharal is something that is found also in many other Kabbalistic works. The idea that the union of male and female is a holy thing. That unlike in some other spiritualities, sexuality is seen as an evil thing, as a necessary evil, as a sinful way that we're created. In the Kabbalistic writings, it's not seen that way at all. And the Jewish tradition has always embraced sexuality as being holy when it's done in the right time and the right place. And so, therefore, it actually creates a divine name. The reason why sexuality is so corrupted in the world is because it's so holy. The holier something is, the more it could be corrupted, the more it could be taken in the wrong direction. And he says that the Maharal actually says that it can't be that the very formation, the creation of a human being is through an act that is somehow ugly or lowly. It makes no sense at all. If that were the case, so then the human being is innately ugly. There are those who believe that, but that's not what we believe. We believe that the human being is innately holy, and therefore the way to conceive of a human being is a holy divine act. It's where the divine powers come together of male and female. And so this is indicated in the words. That is to say that it is God that unites man and woman, and so his name is found between them. It's a divine union. It's a divine moment, and therefore the divine name is created through the union of male and female. So he says this is the meaning of the saying in the story of the Talmud that love quashes the flesh. Because between man and woman it is a divine force that unites them. This supernal force overpowers the physical flesh. Meaning? In the story of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Lazar, and their respective wives, when this Roman matron challenged and says, well, your children are not your own, and they said, well, our wives are even bigger than us. They said, well, that just proves my point. And they said, well, love quashes the flesh. What did that mean? On a simple physical level, what that meant was that there's a lot of flesh, we're big, but the love overcomes that flesh and we're able to unite. The Maharal here says a much deeper understanding of what that means. That the flesh doesn't just mean the actual flab, it means physicality. It means that when male and female unite, so the love, the fire that is created there is not a physical thing, it is a spiritual thing. It is a divine gift. And therefore, when man and woman are together in the appropriate way, with holiness and with divine intent, so then at that moment, you actually transcend the physical. You are not a body. Your souls coming together, expressed in the physical world, but not limited to the physical world. That the force that brings together male and female is a divine force. And so therefore, that overpowers the physical flesh. It overcomes the limitations of physicality, and the union is something that's far deeper than the flesh is. In these very brief words, and this is the style of the Maharal, he speaks sometimes in a few sharp words, he conveys a very profound idea. He's saying that this story is like a code language for the Talmudic sages to convey the deeper power of sexuality from a spiritual perspective. That it's the coming together of souls in a physical plane. That you're utilizing, you're expressing through the body a union that is far deeper than the body. And so therefore, it's not limited by the body. What these rabbis were saying in this discussion was that the fact that our bodies are big, that's just their particular example. But this is true of any union, in any relationship. What is the blockage between people? Why can't people get on? Why can't people unite? What is it about us that causes our relationships to be difficult, rocky, sometimes unsuccessful? Why can't we just get on? Why doesn't it just work? The answer is that it's the flesh. It's on a soul level, we're all very pure and straightforward and holy, and we could get on. It's on the physical level that we have blockages. Physical doesn't just mean the actual physical body. It means our lowly personality, our this worldly self. This is what causes all tension that there is in the world, is that we're complicated beings. We have a soul that is goodness, but we also have another side to us, our animalistic side, our physical side, and that's got a lot of baggage, that's got a lot of issues, it's got a lot of ego. And so what prevents us from really uniting is that side of ourselves, is our animalistic side. our physical side. The body in the broader sense of the body, meaning our bodily, physical, material self. If we would be pure souls without bodies, so then we wouldn't have any of these issues. Souls have no issue with each other. Souls are not in competition with each other. They're not a threat to each other. They don't see each other as competition that they have to somehow assert themselves over. Souls are pure. It's our body and the personality that comes with the body that tries to make sure that I have my territory, and you're a threat to my territory. I've got my needs, and if you don't feed them, so then you're no good. It's that side of us that is the blockage to all relationships. So how do we overcome that? So we overcome that by aligning and identifying with our soul, that the more powerful our soulfulness is, the more we align and identify with our soul, so the less those blockages appear. As long as I'm stuck in my ego and myself and the way I see things, the way things should be, according to the way I feel, and my own needs, as long as I'm stuck in all of that, so then I can only really get on with somebody who's willing to go along with that. And the more you're willing to go along with it, the more we'll get along. As soon as you start blocking me and my ego, as soon as you start disagreeing with what I want and not providing my needs as my ego understands them, so then we're in competition now. There's something in between, and it's not going to work. Whereas the more I've transcended my ego, and the more I'm aligning with my soul, with my inner self, my mission, then the more I can get on with you. You're no longer a threat to me. But of course it has to be a two-way thing. For us to unite as one, so then we both have to be on that level. We have to be both working on that plane, on the soul plane. The more bodily stuff there is, the more there's going to get in the way. So the Maharal is suggesting that this story is not an out there story of a very strange example of these two couples who were both extremely obese, and therefore they had this comical issue that some Roman matron brought up of how are you sure that your kids are yours? It's actually much more of a metaphorical description of every single relationship. What that Roman matron was saying is a challenge to every single person in a relationship. Saying, are your kids yours? Meaning, are you really united with your partner? Like, is there a true union there? Can you connect? It's not possible. And you know why it's not possible? Because look at your big fat ego. It keeps you so far away that two oxen could go between you. Which is also that animalistic vision, that you're so distant, that the animal in you is so strong that you're nowhere near another person. You're nowhere near connecting another person. You're so full of yourself and so stuck in your own paradigms and your own way of thinking that there's no room for another to actually connect to you. You haven't allowed it. This is what that Roman lady is saying to all of us. And the Rabbi's response is, you are right. On a physical plane, it is mission impossible. No two people can ever really connect. On a body level, on a physical level, on an ego level, there's no such thing as two people connecting. You can have two people partnering together to massage each other's ego. You can have that. But to actually create a union on a bodily level, on an ego level, it's not possible. But love quashes the flesh, which means that there is a deeper connection that can be created. The fire of God, the Yud and the Hey, the soul connection that can be created, if I'm in tune with my soul, if I'm looking not for somebody to just feed my ego, but I'm looking for a soul connection to fulfill my mission and to help somebody else fulfill their mission, to work together on something greater than the two of us, a divine connection and a divine mission. If there is that element to it, so then that love quashes the flesh, overcomes the ego, the pettiness, the small-mindedness, and you can actually unite together. So from the Maharal's perspective, this story is not just some weird story, but this is an essential lesson for relationships. It's the most basic lesson to start in relationships, to get anywhere real in relationships. You need to learn from these couples. It's far greater than the physical story there. Any questions before we go on? No? Made sense, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Was the ego also, the Roman woman, was it also referring to the fact that when you are obese, it means that you fed literally yourself more than you've needed to?
That's not necessarily the case. You can be gluttonous and it just doesn't show. It's not that somebody who's physically larger is more physical. Not necessarily. There are many possible reasons for that. The Maharal is understanding this as being a spiritual discussion. It's not talking about obesity at all. They were physically large. The story, on that simple level, they were, but it's not saying that being overweight means that you're too physical. Not necessarily.
Does the Maharal bring any relevance to the fact that she was a Roman woman?
He doesn't mention it. He doesn't mention why. But usually, in the Roman nation of the time were descendant of the Edomites, which is Esav, and so a lot of the discussions between the rabbis and the Romans was a Yaakov and Esav discussion as well.
Right.
Because Esav took the path of the physical world, and his position, which is expressed by this Roman matron, is you can't have a union. Like we're physical beings, and physical people can't really unite as one. That's the position of Esav. Whereas the rabbis were saying Yaakov's position, and that is that no, on a soul level there can be real union, there can be real togetherness.
Okay, I would have thought that the idea of having the Roman woman and these rabbis is actually looking at these rabbis as a symbol for the people, for the union with God, just a deeper union, and I don't know what the woman is. Maybe Shabbat, maybe something like that, bigger than them, or something. But it's actually drawing parallel between something outside, saying, how do you claim to have this thing, and saying, love is bigger than our separation.
Yeah. Well, we'll see in the Tanya's version of it, it's much more connected with God as well. We'll see if that fits there. So let's delve into how the Tanya deals with this story. As I said, he doesn't do it directly. It's more in one line, in a broader discussion in chapters 48 and 49, where Rabbi Shnei Zalman brings in this line, love quashes the flesh, to explain a different topic in our relationship with God. So we'll get there through having a look at the Tanya text. Says Rabbi Shnei Zalman, contemplating on the greatness of the Infinite One of God, a thinking person will realize that He is, as His name indicates. There is no end or limit or finitude at all to the light and vitality that diffuse from Him. Meaning, anyone who's thought about God, the thing that baffles us the most about God is His infinity, that He's called Ein Sof, the Infinite One, because He has no end. He is infinite. And that thought, the thought of infinity, is what really gets us about God, because that's something we just simply cannot really fathom. The idea that he always was and always will be, that he is in all places but not limited to any place. That idea, when you think about God, this is what does your head in, because we cannot fathom of infinity. We can use the word infinity as if we know what we're talking about, but something that is actually infinite. Infinite meaning not finite, not defined, not limited in any way, with no description, is just beyond our mind to really materialize. And so when you think about this is what you realize. This is the one thing you can say about God, is that you can't say anything about him, because there's nothing to describe him. He's not finite, he's not limited, he's completely infinite. So this is something to contemplate on, meaning we don't have a picture of that, we don't have a definition of that, but the fact that we don't have that picture is something to think about. Any picture you had of God, you have to erase, because he's infinite. Any description you have to transcend it, you have to go beyond it, because he's not that. He's beyond any description, any finite description. So it's not that he's big, he's infinite. It's not that he's strong, he's infinite. Infinity is the only thing you can say about him, which is a negative. He is not finite. You can't say anything that he is. You can only say what he isn't. He's not finite. So this thought, when you contemplate it strikes home, and it has ramifications as well. Now, had the worlds descended from the light of the Infinite One without contractions, but according to a gradual descent from grade to grade by means of cause and effect, this world would not in such case have ever been created in its present form in a finite and limited order. Meaning, if God is infinite, that's a given. The world that we inhabit and everything in it, including ourselves, we are finite. We are defined. We are limited. That is a given. The question is, how did you get from infinity to finiteness? How did God create a finite world? It sounds like a silly question. What do I mean? He can do whatever he wants. Right, he can do whatever he wants. But where's the connection? How can infinity express itself and the expression is finite? If you're really infinite, then everything about you is infinite. And therefore everything you do is infinite. How do we get from infinity, God, to finiteness, this world? It couldn't be direct. You can't have infinity expressing itself and ending up with finiteness. It can only be through contraction, through hiddenness, through concealment. God could not express himself to create the world. On the contrary, he hid himself to create the world. This is a topic, a very broad one, that's dealt with at great length throughout Hasidic writings, and a great preoccupation of the Kabbalistic masters. The idea of what's called the tzimtzum in Hebrew, the contraction of the divine light. You or I, when we try to be creative, when we try to do something, when we try to achieve something, we are expressing ourselves. And if it's going well, we want to express more. God, when he created the world, had to conceal himself. He had to hide himself, because expressing himself, he's infinity. And so expressing infinity, you're just going to get infinity. For him to create a finite world, he had to contract, conceal, hide himself in order for there to be the possibility of finiteness. And so the act of creation, the divine act of creation, is the opposite to what we would understand as creation. Our creativity is expressing ourselves. God's creativity is by hiding himself, keeping his infinite light under wraps so there can be a finite existence. So when we describe God as creating the world, the power of God to create the world, it's not that he's so amazing that he was able to create the world. What's amazing is that he was able to conceal himself to allow the world to exist, to hold himself back, to hide in order for there to be finiteness. It's a little bit like, and a metaphor used by the Kabbalists very often, it's a little bit like a genius who's trying to have a conversation with an average-minded person. When a genius has a conversation with an average person, so they don't really have the same language. A genius's language, the way a genius thinks, they think at 1,000,000 miles an hour on the deepest ideas. And so for them to have a conversation, for them to share some information, for them to teach something, they can't just talk their mind. If a genius talks their mind, nobody's going to know what's going on, unless you're also a genius. For an average person to appreciate the teachings of a genius, the genius has to put aside their mind, their thoughts, and they have to start thinking like an average person. They have to limit themselves to an idea. If you've ever been in the presence of genius, you can't keep up with them. You can't relate to what they're saying. They're going too fast, too deep. Like you're lost. But if they can stop and say, I'm not going to act myself, I'm going to hold myself back and try and speak in your language, then maybe you'll be able to capture something from the genius. If that's true of two human beings, one of them much smarter than the other, so in the case of God, if the divine infinity would be revealed, then we couldn't be finite. We couldn't exist in our current state as finite beings. If we had direct access, revelation, relationship with infinity, we would be subsumed by that infinity. We'd be swallowed up by it. And so that's what he's saying here, that if God is infinite and the world is finite, it couldn't be that there's a direct revelation of the divine to create the world. There must be a contraction of the divine to create the world. He's not expressing himself, he's hiding himself. Otherwise, the world wouldn't be as it is now, a finite world as we understand it. We wouldn't be finite beings. We also, therefore, wouldn't have free choice. We wouldn't have independence. We wouldn't have autonomy. We wouldn't have an identity, because we'd be subsumed in his infinity, which is no point. The whole point of creation was that we should have free choice. We should be real. For us to be real, for us to have an identity, he had to hide himself, hide his infinity, so we can be our finite beings that we are. So this is a contemplation, at the moment sounding very esoteric, but we're going to see how it's extremely practical soon. That if God is infinite, step number one, I'm finite, is step number two, so then it must be that God concealed himself, contracted himself, hid himself, held himself back in order to allow creation to appear, the finite creation. So this world is not an amazing achievement of God's expressiveness, it's an amazing achievement of God's self-containment, that he held himself back to not show himself, to allow finiteness to appear. This, by the way, Rabbi Zalman says in other places, is how we should think when we're saying the prayers that describe God's creation and how powerful it is that God created the world. We say, blessed are you who spoke and the world was, or you who created the heavens and the earth and everything in them. We're not praising God that he's so amazing to create these things. For God, it's nothing to create. We're praising that he's so amazing to have held himself back to create these things. Going back to the genius, if a genius stood in front of a bunch of kids and gave them a lesson and taught them something, taught kids a lesson, an absolute genius teaching a topic to little children, so would that be impressive? For a genius to teach little kids, is that impressive? Yeah, it is. If kids can understand a lesson from a genius, that's amazing on the genius's part. Why? Teaching little kids, isn't that easy? No. For him to hold back his genius, to not think in those terms and to be able to speak in a little kid's beginner's terminology, that is impressive. Not that the information was hard for him to understand. It's hard for him to understand it like a kid, to put himself aside. It's the humility that is impressive, not the greatness, but the humility. In a similar way, that God created the universe, that's not impressive for God to create a universe. That's not vast for him. He's infinite. What's impressive is that he confined himself, he held himself back to allow the universe to exist. Not that it's hard for him, but it's impressive that he did that he bothered to do that. As he explains further, Only an extremely minute portion of light and vitality illuminates this lowly creation in a revealed manner, pervading it and animating it so that it continues to exist in a state of finitude and limitation. The amount of divine energy that is invested in all of this universe, physical and spiritual universes, the amount of divine energy invested in that is minuscule, a tiny portion of light. That's all that God allowed to be revealed. His infinite self he hid away, and he allowed a little smidgen of a ray, of a trickle of light, of divine light, of divine energy, to energize all of the universe, for all of history. This contracted illumination is considered as virtually nothing at all compared to its infinite source. And there is no comparison or relationship between them, as the term comparison is understood in values where the figure 1 has a relevant value compared to the number 1 million, for it is 1/1,000,000th part of it. But with infinity, there is no number that can be considered relative to it, for a billion or trillion do not attain the relevancy of the figure 1 in comparison with a billion or trillion, but is veritably counted as nothing. He's just giving a very simple mathematical equation here. That ray of light that enlivens the universe, compared to its source, is nothing. It's like it's nothing. Why? Because in ratios, in mathematics, 1 to a million is 1/1,000,000th. It has a presence. 1 to a billion is 1/1,000,000th. But a billion to infinity is no different to 1 in infinity. In other words, if I've got to walk 1,000,000 miles and I take a step, have I got somewhere? Yes, I'm one step closer to 1,000,000 miles. But if I've got to walk an infinite walk and I've walked 1,000,000 miles, am I any closer than one step? No closer. I've still got infinite to go. In the scheme of a billion, 1 has an identity, but in the scheme of infinity, even a billion has no greater measure than 1 does. So the divine light that is invested in the world, give it any number you want. You can say it's worth 1, or you can say it's worth 1,000,000,000, but it's a finite smidgen of light. In the face of God's self, his infinity, it's nothing. So his infinity, he's completely hidden away, and all the energy that there is in the universe is an expression of finiteness, a finite light. The way one Kabbalist put it is that if God's infinite, he must also have the power of finiteness. Because if you're infinite, you've got everything. If you're unlimited, no limitations, so you must also have limitedness as well, because you're not limited. If you don't have limitedness, then you're limited, and that's not unlimited. Got it? So God, in his unlimitedness, also has the power to be limited. To create the world, what he did is he hid his unlimitedness, and what was left is his limitedness, his power to be limited. So his infinite light is hidden, and his power to be finite is revealed, and that's what this world is. And that power to be finite is 1 billion, whatever number you give it, it's nothing compared to his infinite light, which is hidden away. So when we describe God as being the creator of the universe, that's not so impressive for him. What's impressive is that he limited himself to a universe. As expansive as the universe looks to us, from God's perspective, that's finiteness. And that finiteness is nothing in the space of infinity. Where are we getting with all this? Let's go on. The purpose of all the contractions is the creation of the physical human body and the subjugation of the evil of that body to bring about the victory of light over darkness. When you elevate your divine soul and your animal soul, together with their garments and all the powers of the body, to God alone. This is the purpose of the descent of the worlds. Meaning, why did God do this unbelievable, massive thing of self-negation? The creation, we said, it's not amazing that God expressed himself to create a universe. We're not amazed by his creativity. It's nothing for him. What's amazing is that he negated his infinite self, he hid that away to allow finiteness to exist. Why did he do all this? Because he wants my body. He wants my physical being that has free choice, that has autonomy, it has its own identity, it has its own independence. I have a divine soul and an animal soul. I have a choice to make in every moment of my life. Am I going to do what's good, or am I going to do what's not good? Am I going to be selfish, or am I going to be selfless? Am I going to live a meaningful, purposeful life, or am I going to live an indulgent life just caring about myself? At every moment I have that choice. Why do I have that choice? Because God hid himself and created me in my finite self as a finite being. The whole reason why God did this, why he put his infinite light aside, was so I could exist with my struggles to try and do the right thing. This is what it was all for. This is the purpose of the descent of the worlds, of the finite light being revealed and the infinite light being hidden aside. Which, I have to take that a bit personally. I have to say that this is about me, and I don't mean me excluding you, but I mean us excluding the rest of creation. It's not upper universes and upper realms that God was trying to create. What he was creating, what he wanted to create, was our little world, you and me with our personal struggles, with our daily challenges to try and live a good life and do the right thing. That's what he did all this for. He created the world for our moral challenge. That's what it's all about. And creating the world meant putting his infinite light aside, hiding his infinite light to allow finiteness to exist, so we would have free choice. If his infinite light would be revealed, we'd just be a part of that. We wouldn't have free choice, we wouldn't have identity. We'd just be a part of him. His infinite light was hidden, so I could have the choice of what did I do this morning, what did I do this afternoon, what am I doing tomorrow? Am I making the right choices or not? Am I living a good life or not? That's what it's all about. Therefore, as water mirrors the reflection of a face, which we quoted previously, the Holy One has, figuratively speaking, laid aside his great infinite light and has stored it away and concealed it by means of different kinds of contractions. And all this because of his love for lowly us, in order to raise us up to God, for love quashes the flesh. Meaning, what has God done? He's put aside his infinite light. He's hidden that completely because he wants a relationship with us. He wants to connect to us. And the only way to connect to us is by creating us as independent beings, because you can't have a relationship with yourself. So he had to put himself aside to create independent beings, to give us free choice to choose a relationship with him. What inspired him to do that? Love. His love for us, his desire for a relationship with us. For love quashes the flesh. Meaning, Rabbi Zalman here is quoting the Talmudic passage that we started with and saying that is talking about God. God's relationship with us is where he had to put aside his flesh to connect to us. What does his flesh mean? Meaning his infinite self. He's an infinite being. But to relate to us, he had to hide that aside. He had to hide it, he had to conceal it. He had to push it aside. Out of love, he went totally out of his self, as it were. God's self is being infinite. Finiteness is not his thing. But for the sake of a relationship, he put his infinite self aside, he hid himself aside in order for us to be revealed, for us to appear. He filled all of existence, but he concealed all that so there could be us. Love quashes the flesh. The love that he has for us caused him to go against his nature, as it were. To not let his infinity be revealed, in order to give us space to exist. For love. It's all for love. So, how is that supposed to make us feel? How are we supposed to react to this realization that God has done this awesome thing? Because for him to not let his infinity shine, which is what he is, to hide that away, all because he wants me, because he wants me not just to exist, but to actually look for him, search for him, try to connect to him. And so he said, I know I'm God, and I know being God means being infinite, but I'm not going to let that get in the way of my relationship with you. So I'm hiding away my infinity because I want you to exist. And he created this whole universe, which is not a big deal that he created so much. The big deal is that he hid himself to let finiteness exist, all because he wants to relate to me. How's that supposed to make me feel? So, as waters reflect the face, I have to act in kind. I have to respond in kind. How much more? And in an infinite number of times more, is it fitting that we also should relinquish and set aside all we possess, both spiritually and physically, and renounce everything in order to cleave to him with attachment, desire, and longing, without any hindrance, within or without, neither of body, nor soul, nor money, nor family. Meaning that no other desire should get in the way of our connecting to him. That if God has put his self aside, his nature aside, his infinite self aside to connect to us, so the least we can do is to respond in a similar way on our level. And that is to not let anything get in the way of us connecting to him. Meaning no hindrance, no blockage, nothing in our nature should stop us from connecting to him. We have to put aside both spiritual and physical instincts to connect to him. Meaning that our body, first and foremost, has certain urges. Many of those urges are immoral and lowly and not conducive to connecting to God. So we can't allow that to stop us from connecting to him. Even soul. Our soul also has a certain level of desire. We want to spiritually connect in certain ways, but not necessarily what our soul wants is what God wants always. Even spirituality can sometimes be what I want to do as opposed to what God wants to do. So not only our bodily, material desires we have to put aside, but even our soul's desires have to be put aside for what God wants. It's not my spiritual fulfillment, it's what is the divine mission for me? What does God want from me? I have to put that aside. The desires for money or family, meaning honor, to expand myself through family, to propagate myself, to have possessions, whether they be material possessions or even the possession of a family that's mine, that can also not be a blockage. Those desires are natural and innate, but I have to overcome them for my desire to God. Doesn't mean to not want a family or to not want money, but that these things should be a part of my divine service, not a hindrance of it. If God put aside his self, which is infinity, to connect to me, So then I have to put aside myself to connect to Him, which means that my intention has to be, what does God want from me? And that's what I do. Not what I want on a body level or even on a soul level, but what does God want? This is the challenge we've been given. And that is that love quashes the flesh. That God's love for us meant that He'll put His infinity aside to connect with us. Our love for Him has to be that I'll put whatever my desires are, whatever is myself, I'll put that aside to connect to Him. He did the ultimate contraction of self, and our challenge is to do the same, which means that we can put our money on that everything that is positive in our relationship with God will have a hindrance, a blockage, something getting in the way of it to try and stop us doing it. Anytime we do try to really connect to God, there will be something coming up that will try and get in the way. The very definition of this relationship that we have with God is that we have to quash the flesh. There's going to be something we have to give up, that we have to transcend, that we have to get over, that we have to somehow break through to get there. By definition, any true spiritual connection with God is going to involve working through something, giving something up, conquering it. And it's something that's me. Because for God to relate to us, He couldn't be His infinite self. To reveal infinity, then you haven't got me. I can't be in the picture. For us to relate to God, I can't be my human self. I can't be stuck in myself. I have to transcend that. And therefore, it's going to be just the thing that challenges me the most. That is going to be the thing that I need to transcend to really connect to God. The thing that I define myself as, the thing that I'm comfortable with, the thing that I think is what I am all about, my ego, that's what I'm going to have to give away to reach God. How are we supposed to do that? How can we negate ourselves? Love quashes the flesh. Love has the power to overcome, to override, to break through those limitations and to connect. That we have a part of our soul that is ready for this, that is looking for this. And when we tap into that, we're able to overcome the things that are stopping us and connect to God. To create that Yud and Hey, the divine name, that union of oneness. So this, Rabbi Shnei Zalman is saying, this is the real inner meaning of that story. Of the story of the Roman matron talking to these two rabbis and saying, your children are not your own. You can't really have a true union. The Yud and the Hey, the soul down here and the divine source of the soul up here, which is the ultimate marriage, how can you possibly unite, says the Roman matron? How's it possible? We have an ego, we are defined as ourself, we are finite, God is infinite. It's just not a match. There's no way for us to connect. Connecting to God is an impossibility. And the answer, the rabbi said, is that love quashes the flesh. That God, in His infinity, overcame that. He overcame His infinity. He hid that away to connect to us. The creation of the world is God concealing His infinity because He wants us to exist. So He put His infinite self aside to allow us to exist. And therefore, our side of creation, our side of the relationship is for us to constantly be overcoming our limitations, our ego, our self, to try and transcend, to do that which is good even when it doesn't feel good. To do that which is right even if it doesn't feel right at the time. To do not what's right for me, not what feels good to me, but what God wants us to do. And every time we do that, we overcome the flesh, we overcome the limitations of the physical, and we create a true union, a bond, a oneness with God. And this is Rabbi Shnei Zalman is our mission, and we can do it. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
You said that it's not only our physical desires, but our spiritual desires that also need to be recalibrated.
Correct.
The spiritual desires, can you explain how those can be different to something that is God's will? Because I would assume that.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good question. How can spiritual desires be different to God's will? Well, essentially the soul's desire, if we would be able to isolate the soul away from the body and say, what do you want? What does the soul want? The soul wants to be close to God. So where do you get closeness to God? With God. So the soul's desire is to leave the body and to be one with God. That's what the soul really wants. Translating that into more practical, what that means is that our spiritual side is an escapist part of ourselves. It just wants to get out of here. It doesn't want to be a part of the mundaneness of the world. It doesn't want to be involved with paying bills and finding parking and shopping, and it doesn't want to be involved with the material world at all. It just wants to float away to God. And that's the soul's will, but that's not what's God's will. God's will is that the soul should be in a body and should elevate the body, refine the body, make this world holy. That's not the soul's will, that's God's will. So you have three opinions. One Jew and three opinions. You have the animal soul in our body that just wants the physical world, just wants to indulge in the physical. That's all the body wants. You've got the soul that has no interest in the physical world whatsoever, just wants to be one with God, wants to get out of here. And then you have God's opinion, and that is that I created you to be together. The soul should be in the body, teach, elevate, train, reform, refine the body, and make a difference in this world. Which means that to chase the desires of the body and indulge in just a eat, drink and be merry lifestyle, the body will be happy with that, the soul will not be happy. To completely negate all that and to just fast and meditate all day and live on a hilltop and try and expire from this world, the soul is into that, the body not so much. God is not happy with either. God said, I created you a soul in a body to make a difference in this world. So that means, yes, you have to engage with people and you have to be normal. You have to work for a living and infuse that with the meaning. You have to live down here in this world. So the desires of the body can get in the way, and the desires of the soul could also get in the way. To do God's will means to live in the here and now, a soulful life in the body.
What about for people that are associated with like terrorism and murder and killing and hatred? What about for them? Because it's too late for them. So like their body is not going to be refined and their soul is not going to be elevated. So what's with them? Like what goes with them?
Okay, it's a topical one. There is a point that somebody could reach where in this lifetime there's nothing they can do. There's no way to help them in this lifetime. There are extreme cases where their soul in their body has become like the body has taken over and corrupted their goodness so much where there's no hope for them in this lifetime. There is such a thing. But that's an extreme circumstance to be in. Most of us have maybe made a mess here and there, but we've been given another day to fix it. So while there are war situations and there are situations of danger where somebody's life has they've given up their innocence, they've given up their right to life on a certain level. But that's an extreme circumstance. Yeah.
Is contraction still happening in the sense of so we, in a way, we honor a finite God because we're not worshipping Ein Sof, because that's kind of like not really, we know of that, but we don't kind of worship that. So if we did praise the revealed, the infinite, would we cease, or like is this contraction still important?
Yeah. The contraction has to continue, because if we would be able to tap into the infinite, we would lose our existence. We would fizzle away. We'd disappear. The Kabbalists describe our work in this world, in doing a mitzvah, doing holy acts, is expanding the vessel of this world to be able to handle more of the light than it originally did. So at the beginning of time, at the beginning of creation, God put his infinite light in concealment, and he allowed a finite smidgen of light to be revealed. That smidgen is all the world can handle. But as we do more good in the world, we expand the vessels of the world to handle more divine light. Every act of goodness, of using the physical world and our physical bodies to do a mitzvah, a holy act, allows the world to handle more of that light. So that light is actually becoming thicker, broader. And there's a certain point, cumulatively, when we have done that so much that the world is now able to handle the infinite light. Not that we can get to it, but we can get as far as the human race can get, and then God reveals his infinite light in the finite world. That's the Mashiach vision, which is where the infinite is revealed. So in that way we are pulling down the infinite, but it can't be revealed yet. We can't handle it yet. But then we won't need free choice anymore. We won't need to be autonomous anymore. That it would have served its purpose. So we can be one with our source again. But in the meantime, to maintain the mission, the relationship, there has to be concealment. There has to be the contraction.
Mm-hmm. But the contraction as an event is
always
still
happening. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's always happening. Yeah. Okay. We'll stop there. And we're going to break for now, even though I wanted to do another class next week, but I don't think it's going to work. So, so we're going to break this is going to be the end of that series, and we're going to continue in the new year to finish the last 4 chapters of Tanya, chapter 50 to 53. That will be probably mid-February, because I'm going to be away a bit end of January. So. Look out for the emails. We'll advertise for it for the finale, the grand finale of Tanya, the last 4 chapters, which will, God willing, be in mid-February. And next Monday, you're all invited to join us for my son's first haircut, my 3-year-old son's first haircut, which will be 4:30 at my home, 128 Wellington Street. You're welcome to come and have a snip and a l'chaim. That's next Monday, 4:30. And the Monday after that, we have concert with Nadav and Fetter Hendel. So everyone's welcome to come to that during Hanukkah. Thank you.